All right, everyone, we are getting close to the end of the book. We're going to be picking up where we left off last week, which is on page 258. And I figure we'll try to at least read the one section called the Universal Octave. And if we feel like it, we can continue on from there. We have just over an hour, and there's about 30 pages left in the book. So I imagine it'll probably be this week and the next 2 weeks to finish, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Yeah, before we get into it, I'll just take a short moment and send love and light to Walter Russell and to his partner in life in this work, Lau Russell, and also to all the good folks at the University of Science and Philosophy who continue to make this work available to seekers. And I feel grateful for being available or having this material available to us and this epic download of cosmic consciousness. So thanks to Walter Russell. Okay. So is there anybody who wants to start the reading for us?
I'm happy to.
Great. Thanks, BJ.
You're welcome. 258, the Universal Octave. The heartbeat of the universe, starting from zero of rest, spirals from its minimum to its maximum and back again to zero, in 4 pairs of opposite actions and reactions. These 4 pairs of opposite electric interweavers constitute the universal spiral octave wave, by means of which the dynamic universe of effect rises from the static universe of cause. Figure 67. The octave wave formula which governs all motion and its birth position in the universal wave is as follows. Figure 68. Generation, degeneration, positive, negative. Two-way journey from zero through zero to zero. 0 to 4 means the centripetal direction toward the apex of the spiral, which leads to higher potential, density, gravity, and the white heat of incandescence. 4 to 0 means the centrifugal direction toward the base of the spiral, which leads to lower pressure, lower potential, vacuity, radiativity, and the black cold of space. Each of these is half of a cycle. The reason an octave cannot be counted from 1 to 8 instead of 1 to 4 is because each of the pressures which bear the relations of 1 to 4 positive in the octave is a credit pressure, which has its equal opposite debit pressure in 1 to 4 negative. The elements of matter born on the spiral pairs of opposites as tones have the same relation as tones of music have to the octave wave. All wave motion is expressed in 8 tones, 4 pairs of opposites. The middle pair is seemingly 1. The octave is usually expressed as 7 for this reason. An octave is a series of orderly harmonic tones. Tones are multiplied and divided pressures of light, spaced rhythmically with mathematical precision upon each octave wave of motion. The law which applies to one effective motion applies to all, whether sound wave, electric current, color spectrum, or octaves of elements of matter. No state of motion has permanence or even duration. Everything is forever in a state of transition, changing its position in its wave by either multiplying or dividing its vibration frequencies to change its conditioning. The basis of all octaves is the keynote of rest, from which the octave springs to express the idea which lies within the magnetic stillness of that keynote. The fulcrum of the wave of musical octaves is its keynote, from which all tonal changes in the octave are mathematically calculated in wave frequencies and volume. That keynote is always in one's consciousness, whether the note is being sounded or not. It is the balance of its octave. All tones are out of balance with it at all times, and forever desire balance. No state of motion can evade the keynote of rest from which it sprang, nor can it be separated from it electrically in matter or consciously in mind. No matter what instrument produces octave tones, its frequencies and other dimensions must be in the orderliness demanded by the opening and closing spiral pairs which control those tones by conditioning them. Likewise, no matter what the instrument, whether larynx of man, string of violin, carbon wave field, or color spectrum, its sole motivating power or producing charge of dimension for the purpose of producing change of tone is electric pressure directed by desire and borrowed from the keynote of the octave's stillness. Furthermore, all power thus borrowed from one expression in any octave tone must be in balance with the opposite of that tone within which those borrowings have been debited. The outstanding fact of natural law must be borne in mind in considering those principles as applied to the mechanics of the universal wave, which produces the octave wave tones of the elements of matter with such precision that any effect produced by any of them in combination or separately will produce that same effect always.
Thanks, BJ. So it's a little similar. It's funny. It reminds me of reading through the Law of One, where at the end, when they get into the study of the archetypical mind, it gets challenging. So it's a bit technical here at the end, although it's, the technical aspects have been sprinkled throughout. So, but anyway, it's a little bit technical, and yeah, but we'll do our best to peel it apart and see what we can gain from understanding of this. Does anybody have any comments to start off or questions? Kent?
Yeah, on the bottom of page 259. The basis of all octaves is the keynote of rest, from which the octave springs to express the idea which lies within the magnetic stillness of that keynote. Okay, what is the keynote?
Yeah, that's a really important question. I have that highlighted also, and I am not sure. Okay. He says that further down, I did get a little bit of an insight. Yeah, it's a great question, Kent. I think it was my main question from this section too. I guess I'll just say what I can about it, which is it may just be the point of stillness from which the wave springs.
So in figure 68, would the point of stillness be 0, or would it be 4 in the middle?
It would be the outside zeros, the two outside zeros.
Right,
yeah.
Okay.
And this is a little bit, it's a little bit of a paradox or a mystery, but there's stillness where the wave springs from, which again is the center of the cube, from the intersection of the three inertial planes, if you can remember that geometry or those figures. And then when it reaches its apex at the corner of the cube, there's also stillness there. But it's a stillness of, it's basically the stillness at the center of the incandescent unit that was produced by the cube. So the stillness of suns, the stillness of planets, the stillness of us, we're centered by a point of stillness. Each of us is centered by a point of stillness. And compacted around that stillness is the idea that is being manifest, through this process. So the form is surrounding the point of stillness at the center of the wave, of that part of the wave. So it's stillness at the beginning, stillness at the middle, when form is at its peak, and stillness at the end. The whole thing is sort of organized around and through stillness.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
That's the sense that I make of it too. And I think from the beginning of that section, where there was this sentence about the dynamic universe of effect rises from the static universe of cause. So it to me just takes it back to creator and takes it back to, the original thought, or, the space from which the original thought arises, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's right. And then, this is me going out on a limb, but as you all may have heard, me kind of talk about how does time space fit into this model. So I think the wave and all this electric activity that we're reading about, the description Walter Russell describing, are the dynamics of space-time. They belong almost pretty much purely to space-time, where there's motion in 3 dimensions. And it may be that the static universe of cause includes time space. And Ra's description of time space is that there basically is no motion. You can move in time. There's movement in time, but there's no movement in space. So it's static. So I think that the inner planes, as I've said, some of you might have heard this. I think the inner planes, the inertial planes of the cube, may represent time space, which is a static realm. And there is no motion. There's no 3-dimensional motion in, X, Y, and Z, but there is motion in time, which the way I kind of conceptualize that is allows us to be free to explore idea, but there's no manifestation in form of that idea. It requires entrance into space-time to experience the idea that we're able to contact in time-space.
I have a thought in terms of the morphogenetic field. I'm wondering, since it is all of quantum space at once, and I'm wondering if that's what you're speaking of, that, it's all still. In some of my own personal work, I can go through my layers and into the quantum field of my own multidimensional self and find that stillness, the 0 point, and extract things that don't need to be there any longer. And it feels very similar to what we're discussing here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the way that I've understood people describe the quantum field, I don't know, I guess I've heard it in different contexts, but it seems to at least refer to there's a holographic and not like they call it, action at a distance, where there can be entanglement of 2 atoms, for example, across vast distances of space, and there could be instantaneous transfer of information from one to the other. And there's a holographic effect there, and that's that is intrinsic to this model. So the cube that borns suns and photons and matter and planets is a holographic object. It's a metaphysical holographic object. It replicates like infinitely. So there's a cube associated with each logos, each sun, each person, each coherent unit of light, and they're all interconnected. So I think that would be a direct connection to what you're describing, May, of the quantum field and the way that the quantum effects are able to manifest is because of this interconnected, interpenetrating. All cubes they share the same geometry and physics and metaphysics, and in some funny, mysterious way, there's sort of only one of them. Not literally, because there are infinite. There's one for each unit of light, and as we experience reality, of course, there's infinite units of light, but they're all controlled by the same geometry. The same geometric metaphysical object.
Yeah,
and that object is what the one infinite creator generated for it to create the illusion, for it to be able to like explore its infinite idea.
to me, that feels like it touches upon the last paragraph where he says the outstanding fact of natural law, etc., produces the octave wave tones of the elements of matter with such precision that any effect produced by any of them in combination or separately will produce that same effect always. So even if it's an apparently different hydrogen atom, they have the same qualities.
That's exactly right. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And as I like to do, one of the what that stimulates for me is like our our emotional, spiritual evolution is so similar too. Like any sort of patterns of evolution that I notice in myself is echoed and mirrored as the patterns and evolution in each of you as well, and so like learning about myself, I learn about all of us.
Mm-hmm.
and about how we evolve and how we suffer and how we grow and how we love, and I think that's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, what it brings to mind, that's a great point, BJ, that you made about I agree with you. When you read the last paragraph, any effect produced by any of them in combination or separately will produce that same effect always. I also extend that to our emotional and evolutionary process. Like the way that I understand it is that it may seem like I can watch somebody else make choices and move through life and not, I may not understand them. But what I've come to kind of believe is that if I had the same conditions weighing upon my consciousness, there's no possibility that I would make a different choice than they have. Like consciousness moves precisely in all contexts. Like each of us makes movements and choices through our reality, and really it's us unfolding the will of the creator. And I believe that the will of the creator works the same in all of us, which is quite somewhat of a mystery. And I don't mean to get us off into too deep of territory, but that's not directly related to what we're reading. But anyway, I think that when Walter Russell says any effect produced by any of them, so this is talking about kind of the physics and metaphysics of light. And I guess in my experience, it also extends to like our behavior and our choices. Like consciousness is universal. and it works the same through everybody. Anyway, I don't know if that came across, but
yeah,
it's one of the doorways for me into oneness and compassion. You know, I try to understand that if I was in someone else's shoes and I had had all the experiences that they had had, and I had all the information that they had had, I absolutely would make the same decision. I can think that I would make a different decision. And from over here, sometimes it seems like people make mistakes, but I know that I would make the same quote unquote mistakes if I was in their shoes. Anyway. Kent?
yeah,
Yeah, well, I mean, the way you're expressing it, so if you had all the same experiences that they had had, and you knew all the same things that they did, then you would be the same person as they are.
Right.
Basically.
Yes.
And if you're the same person as they are, then you would make the same decision.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. And it is true that I am the same person as they are, because we're all riding the same wave of consciousness. We're all expressions of the same basic intelligence. You know, it's all the one infinite creator.
Yeah. But people do make different decisions.
Right.
So how does that fit with what you're saying?
Well, one of the qualities of this this octave wave and the cube is that we each have we each occupy a distinct, like, I don't know what to call it, like a little room within the infinite mind of the creator. And we're able to kind of accumulate experience that's unique to us as a soul, as a mind, body, spirit complex. And it's recorded somewhere, you know, it's recorded in our soul, you could say. But Walter Russell says all the information that takes place within a cube is written on the surface of the cube, and it stays with it. And so that's the mechanism that allows us to accumulate information. Like I have written different information across my lifetimes than you have, Kent. You know, and you have accumulated different information. And eventually in fourth density, we'll be able to share that information with one another. But in third density, we can't. And so because I have a different history of information and you have a different history, we make seemingly different choices.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of how I understood it. Okay.
Yeah. And I believe also that, you know, the earth has its own you know, room or space, and it's called the Akashic Record, or the Hall of Records. And all of the experience of all the entities that are taking part in Earth's journey are written upon that, whatever it is, that metaphysical cube, or, you know, I don't know how it actually works, but I believe all units of light, all logoi, all coherent systems of light have that, including humans. And yeah.
Right. Right.
And I've also had a thought about the veil. I've wondered whether or not the veil is basically turning the outer surfaces of the cube, like perhaps in the beginning of this galaxy, when there was no veil, the outer surfaces of the cube it was the kind of mirror that you could see through, you know, a two-way mirror. And the invention was the transition of that surface to be a one-way mirror, so we can't actually see through it. For the veil, we could see into the what we call the subconscious mind, which is just looking out beyond the surface of our cube and into the entirety of the universe. And we could just do that without any effort. But then maybe the veil is like actually changing the quality and the transparency of the edges of our, you know, our space of consciousness, our cubic wave field. Right. It's just a theory. I don't know, but it's intriguing to me.
Yeah, it is.
Just to riff on that thought, Aaron, I think that there's a lot of negatively polarized beings that are wanting to intensify the veil through chemical warfare, both in the sky and in our food, and to change our frequency in a multitude of ways, so that we are, the so-called veil, between conscious and unconscious is even harder to see through. Yeah. Amen.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Well, that the ways of conquest and empire will do whatever they'll use the law of one and the power of the one to do whatever they see fit. And yeah, I of course think that they're quite clever along their path, and bless them for it. Helps us clarify what we're up to and what our hearts tell us is true.
The path of that which is not.
Correct.
I think their job is to explore what it is to be, to the extent that it's possible to explore what it's like to be outside of God. I mean, of course you can't be outside of God, but that, I think that's what the Creator is attempting to experience through the negative path.
Yeah.
What it would be like to be without God or outside of God.
Yeah.
To the extent that God can actually experience being outside of itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have
and
a
I
thought
also
on
think
that.
in a way, I'll just make a quick comment and then you go. I also think in a way that's what we all do whenever we suffer. Like that's what suffering is
Right.
an attempt to pretend to ourselves that we're outside of God or that there's a problem.
Right.
You go, Jim.
The negative path, the path of that which is not, I've thought in the past, might have more of an ability to do what the Creator wants to have done, which is to know itself. Because the negative path provides another way for the Creator to know itself. But when the negative path gets into the beginning of sixth density, it has to be abandoned because it sees that all is one and it cannot separate itself from that oneness, and it has to reverse its polarity and become positive. So the negative entity provides both the positive and the negative ways for the Creator to know itself.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I mean, it seems so obvious that in the introduction of the veil, which allowed for the negative path to become a possibility for the Creator to experience, it seems like it created so much more possibilities for interaction between entities than was possible before the veil. So it seems quite apparent that it did aid the Creator in knowing itself in more diverse ways. And since the Creator is infinite, it seems like it gave the Creator more latitude to know more about itself.
And also in 30.1, Don asks a question about the negative polarity. He said, if in the beginning there is only the Creator and there is no other entity, then the first path is service to self, because there is only the Creator. Service to others only comes into effect when there is other creations, other beings, and then service to others is a possibility. So the very first path is service to self.
Right.
Right.
And aren't they sort of paradoxically this, in sixth density, it's seen that they're the same path. It's this, there is only service, whether it's to self or others, there's only service to the Creator, no matter how you describe it.
Right. And then by the middle of sixth density, the polarities are given up. There are no more polarities used. Those are the tools for getting to that point.
Mm-hmm.
After that point, then polarity is abandoned.
Right. Yeah. And one of the things that I have not yet pierced in terms of making a connection between what Walter Russell describes of the octave and what Ra describes of the octave is the densities. Like, so what we just read, you know, the section was called the universal octave, but it's not the same as Ra's universal octave. You know, it's not the same description. It doesn't mean that they're not compatible. It's just that what Walter Russell's describing as the universal octave, again, I think is the octave of light that is generating space-time and matter. So it's like the octave of, not the octave of first density, but I don't have a good, I don't yet have really stable language to describe this, but there is the correspondence between the 8 and the 8. But in this case, there's the 8 pressure conditions, and we can discuss this further if it feels interesting to you guys. But these 1, 2, 3, and then 4, 0, 4 at the center, and then 3, 2, 1, that's the 7. And then the 0 and the 0 of stillness is the 8th, you know, so that's the octave. And those are locking positions of potential of light. So as light travels from stillness into form, and then back from form back into stillness, there are 7 distinct nodal points of pressure. Like there's, and Walter Russell calls them the locking positions, or the he calls them a couple different ways. And that's different than, it's distinct from what Ra describes as the densities, but there's still 7 densities that are surrounded by this sort of 0 of the 8th level, which is kind of the beginning and the end of the densities of consciousness. So they have correspondences to one another, but it's not describing the same exact thing. What we're describing here is more of how does the physical universe come into form. And what Ra describes as the octave is basically like, what are the lessons that the creator is learning at each phase of density, at each density, at each sort of lesson of consciousness, you know? So it's fascinating to me that there's such strong correspondence. It's also a little bit perplexing because they're not the same system, you know? But then again, in 1 second, May, when Ra, you know, when Ra's describing the pattern of 7, you know, there's so many things. There's the chakras of the human body and the human energy bodies and human system. And then there are of course, there's the 7 stations of the archetypical mind. And there's octaves within octaves, and not all of those can be laid one upon another either. You know, when we describe an octave, when Ra describes the octave, there's correspondences to be seen, and there's things to be learned by comparing them, but you can't always lay them one upon another. Anyway, and that's the same here. Go ahead, May.
Just a silly remark, well, or an observation. So as my mind likes to do to try to picture putting things together, I found the 8. So if you had 2 different scales of the 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 0, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. So there's one, and then put another one right alongside of it. And I'm looking at the bottom of the figure on page 258.
Mm-hmm.
So if you put one drawing right adjacent to the next, the 2 zeros, if they're together, they form an 8.
Mm-hmm.
So there's the 8.
Right. Yeah. Which is the infinity symbol, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And that would be the 0 point.
Right.
Yeah, the point of stillness. So yeah. So there, my mind wanted to find just a fun way of finding the 8. So there you go. That's
wonderful. That's really great, May. In fact, you know, that's entering into the realm of symbolism, and you know, it's very rich with meaning, and perhaps even more rich than language, you know, in terms of being able to hold meaning. Symbols are incredibly rich, and it's great to find those patterns. I love that.
I'm glad that is tickles you and everyone else, I'm sure. Yeah.
So Kent, I want to return to your question, the keynote. this is just a hunch, but when Walter Russell talks about the octave of matter, he says that it all, it's the depictions of it are on page 261 and 262. There's there's two different ways of drawing the chart of how light spins up into denser and denser elements of matter, and it takes place in nine steps. There's 9 octaves in that process. So each element of matter would be, when it's in form, would exist in a different position within the wave field. And that might relate to the keynote. So we're returning to that statement. The basis of all octaves is the keynote of rest, from which the octave springs. Maybe not. Well, it's worth, I think it's worth just sort of mentioning anyway, that the elements of matter, when they're crystallized into their, for whenever they are in manifestation, they would actually be on a different position along the wave. So if you were to imagine the cube, and then the wave kind of springing from the center of the cube out towards the edge, out towards the corners, the different elements of matter would actually be in a different position within the cube. And I don't know, I was wondering about how that might relate to the keynote. I wasn't sure if what he's saying here is that the whole thing has one keynote, or if he's kind of introducing the idea that each element has a different keynote, and perhaps they're both the case. I'm not sure. But I just wanted to make that point, because he doesn't really draw it there isn't really one drawing that just depicts what I just described, which is like, they each have their unique position. All the elements of matter have a unique position within the cube. And that's the main point I wanted to just say.
Yeah, right. On page 262, figure 70. Could the keynote of rest be the straight line, the straight up and down line in the middle there that has the noble gases listed?
Yeah, it very well could be. Mm-hmm.
It corresponds to me to what we studied last week, or that line being the keynote of rest.
Mm-hmm.
It corresponds to me when we were reading last week about the spirals, like the tornadoes, the vortexes. Mm-hmm. He was referring to the center point, which doesn't move.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and just like looking at, how a tornado goes when it's really big, it's like slow and moving towards stillness, and then it goes faster and faster, 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 until it's as fast as it can go. But then at the center, there's also stillness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's it. I think I'm probably overcomplicating it. I think the keynote is that line, and that line is always going to be basically the inertial plane. It's the center. So as on this table, as the wave travels back and forth, left and right, winds its way, that's representing, I'm going to say crossing over the inertial plane. But what actually is happening there is, the mother and father lights are exchanging. So one kind of goes to zero in the inertial plane, and then is born again on the other side of the inertial plane to continue the octave to continue this gesture. But at that point, it's completely still. And I think that is the keynote. I think you all have it. I think I was overcomplicating it.
And the noble gases are non-reactive, chemically non-reactive, because they are at rest.
Yeah, they do not. That's right. The noble gases do not chemically mix with anything else.
Right.
Yeah.
Because they are at the point of rest.
Right. And Walter Russell says they are the seeds for all of the elements that are yet to come in that portion, in that next octave. So let's say maybe in the 6th octave, I guess I don't know exactly how this works. In the 5th, 6th octave, neon, the first noble gas, is the seed or contains the seed for sodium, magnesium, aluminum, silicon, phosphorus, sulfur, and chlorine. So neon has the seed of those elements that are that are yet to be born within it.
Right.
And then argon has the seeds of all the elements yet to be born within that, et cetera, et cetera. And they're all just conditions, different pressure conditions of the same thing, right? We've covered that before. It's not, this is a very different model than materialist science, which says that, that each element is completely distinct from the other, et cetera, et cetera. But it's all the same stuff. It's all intelligent, what Rob would call intelligent energy. But it's intelligent energy that has been wound up into higher and higher potentials.
Right.
Higher pressure conditions.
Now, in that figure, before helium, he has listed alphanon, betanon, and gammanon.
Right.
Are those things that are known to conventional science, or is it just they just exist in this model?
No, they haven't. They're too subtle, I think. Is my understanding is they're too subtle for our instrumentation yet to detect.
Okay. Interesting.
As we're naming all of these names, helium, neon, argon, I had a flash of color come through. So it feels like that's also related to the waves of each of those elements is also connected to a wave within the 0 point represented in some color, which is interesting. I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, that's a strong intuition. He has a very distinct teaching about how color corresponds to these different positions. So what he says is, if you look at the lines that run perpendicular to the vertical line,
yep,
those are the elements that occur there. So carbon, so it'd be hydrogen, carbon, silicon, cobalt, rhodium, etc. Those elements are occurring at the wave amplitude, at the very corner of the cube. And those elements are at their perfection, like the perfection of the sphere. So those are perfectly spherical elements. So the shape of those elements are going to be like perfectly spherical. And at that point, yellow occurs. And traveling towards that, we go from, I think he says we go from, red and orange to yellow. And then traveling away from that, we go through green, blue, and violet. Anyway, he's got a map of it. He does some color plates in a different book. He describes how color correlates to all these, to this wave. He has a very distinct model of that, which is interesting. And once again, I haven't been able to figure out how it relates to the 7 rays and the colors of the densities, color correspondences that Ra teaches about the densities, but it's interesting.
I have this theory that it's just my intuition, basically, and I'm not sure if it's accurate, but that third density life is carbon-based, whereas I believe fourth density bodies will be silicon-based.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something you've heard?
I've heard that. I have heard that, yeah.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, wow. Okay, I thought that was my own idea. Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
and the first part of what you say is quite fundamental. I mean, we do, that's well established that carbon is kind of like, it's called carbon-based life forms, right? So carbon is the center of our model of biology, I think. And Walter Russell says that carbon is in fact the midpoint of the whole journey of the 9 octave. Carbon's the sort of like main event of the whole table. Carbon is like the most perfect of all of them. So that's interesting, that we are carbon-based life forms, and in Walter Russell's view, carbon is the
bee's knees.
It's the bee's knees. It's the apex of the whole octave somehow. Even though there's 9 octaves, carbon is the well, it has the highest melting point. It's the most perfectly spherical. There's all these qualities to carbon, and he describes it in other points. I think next week we'll get into some of these descriptions.
Mm-hmm. And it can form diamonds.
Mm-hmm.
It can form into diamonds.
Right, which is the most perfect crystal.
Yeah, which is the most perfect crystal and the hardest natural material on Earth.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. And
I feel inclined to read the next section.
Okay.
Does that suit everyone?
Give it a try. It gets pretty technical, so we'll read it and see what sticks and what doesn't. Anybody feel like reading?
I'll give it a shot.
The elements of matter.
An invariable characteristic of nature is to express life-death cycles of any idea in 9 lesser interweaving cycles enfolded in the one. When you think of man as an idea, you think of him as grown up to fullness of middle age. Until then, we think of generating man as infant, child, and youth. Following his generating cycles come the degenerative ones, in which he gradually repays all of his borrowings from his zero of rest, and returns to that zero again, to again borrow power to re-express the idea of man, figure 71. This process of nature, which expresses its cycles of idea in 9 lesser cycles, is conspicuously present in the life-death cycles of the elements of matter. Carbon alone expresses the idea of matter. All the 9 octaves of the elements are stages of unfoldment and refoldment of carbon. The first 4.5 octaves lead to the maturity of carbon by the generative contraction of gravity. It is the hardest of all of the other stages of its transition, having the highest melting point. The last 4.5 octaves lead from maturity through old age to disappearance at the end of the 9th octave cycle by the radiactive expansion of vacuity, figure 70. Generoactivity begins at the birth of carbon in the 1st octave with generoactive, inner explosive speed of light, which is 186,400 miles per second. It ends with an equal radioactive outer explosive speed. This speed is the limit at which motion can reproduce itself in curved wave fields before reaching zero, where motion and curvature cease. Carbon fulfills the plan of the Creator in his desire to create but one form, the cube sphere. Carbon alone crystallizes in true cube, with all of the qualities of the true cube and sphere fully exemplified. All other elements which crystallize as cubes are octave extensions of carbon. All such extensions occupy the 404 position of wave amplitude. In carbon are all of the elements of its previous stages, just as in man are all of the actions and reactions of his previous stages. Hydrogen is a 1 octave younger prototype of carbon. It forms on the wave amplitude at 404, just as carbon forms at 404, 1 octave ahead. In hydrogen is a whole octave of elemental tones. Several of these have been recently discovered and wrongly named isotopes. Isotopes are split tones, such as those which a violinist could produce between full tones. An amazing thing happens at this point in the unfolding of carbon life record. Hydrogen's melting point is 259 degrees below zero centigrade. And in 1 octave, the winding up process of nature acts like a whiplash at its halfway position, where general activity and radioactivity meet as equals. This effect tightens the winding of carbon into such a dense substance. The melting point jumps to 3,600 degrees above zero in that 1 octave. Nature immediately counterbalances this accelerative action by dropping nitrogen, the next element beyond carbon, into a gas, which melts at 210 degrees below zero centigrade. It does not recover from the gaseous condition during the rest of its octave. The cosmic seed of the carbon octave is helium. Silicon is 1 octave older than carbon. The melting point of silicon drops to less than 1/2 of its younger stage, 1420 degrees. The cosmic seed of the silicon octave is neon. When carbon becomes still, another octave older at the 404 position of cobalt in the 6th octave, it divides its full tone into 10 split isotope tones, 5 on either side. Carbon at this stage has lost much of its vitality and changes its character by thus dividing it into cobalt isotopes. Its melting point has dropped to 1480 degrees, which is slightly higher than the silicon stage of carbon. Because of sharing that position with 10 others, it has lost much of its true cube sphere quality of balance, which the 404 position manifests. The evidence of that is the metallic quality of cobalt, which would be impossible in the true cube sphere position of 404 in the octave wave. The 404 position is one of balance between the pairs of metallic opposites, such as iron and nickel, manganese and copper, chromium and zinc, or sodium and chlorine. When any of these pairs lose their metallic quality, such as iron and oxygen in iron rust, or sodium and chlorine in sodium chloride, they find both rest and balance in the stony quality of the salts. They crystallize in the cubic system if they are equal or near equal opposite pairs. Sodium chloride is a good example. One can see its approximately true cubes in sodium chloride, ordinary table salt, or in the distorted cube crystals of sodium iodide. The 404 position in the octaves of the elements is the position of rest, where any action must end its half cycle and begin its other half. It comes to a point of rest before returning to a point of rest, as all actions and reactions in nature do. At 1 octave of still further aging, carbon becomes rhodium and again climbs to its amplitude position at 404 by 5 efforts and descends by 5 more. Rhodium is more vital than cobalt, for its melting point is 1950 degrees, figure 70. The cosmic seed of the rhodium octave is krypton. Great vitality is often evidenced in nature's creations after they have fully matured. The radioactive death principle is as vital in disintegrating the body as a general active principle is in integrating it. That vitality is enhanced by the opposition of the general active resistance set up against it. Such strong, vital metals as silver, nickel, copper, tantalum, tungsten, osmium, platinum, and gold belong to the aging half cycles of carbon. Tantalum is a radioactive metal which becomes so dense because of opposite opposition between the two electric conditioners that its melting point reaches 3,400 degrees centigrade, or within 200 degrees of carbon. Osmium follows with a melting point of 2,700 degrees and platinum at 1,755 degrees. In this octave, the violent drop from carbon's melting point to nitrogen's melting point at minus 210 is balanced by this corresponding genero-active reaction. In the next octave of carbon's aging, the radioactive death principle becomes more evident in lutetium. After reaching its 3 position in the positive half of this octave, it arrives at its balance position of 404 only after making 13 efforts, as evidenced by 13 isotopes, including unknowns. These are balanced by 13 in the negative half cycle. Among these 13 is the vital tungsten, a negative metal of great commercial value. By bombarding this metal with a sufficiently high current to cause it to disintegrate, it will discharge its seed of inert cosmic gases, just as an oak tree will discharge its cosmic seed in acorns. The cosmic seed of the lucidium octave is xenon. The cosmic seed of carbon's last octave of disappearance arises from the inert gas neutron. Octaves unfold from their past recorded seed, and they must have a seed into which their present record can refold. That principle is absolute in nature. Radium and actinium evidence the going to seed process of all completed cycles of growing things in a strong measure. One can see this process taking place in radium without resorting to the electrocution process referred to as applied to tungsten. A small telescopic instrument, the spinthariscope, contains a needle upon which a microscopic portion of radium has been placed in front of a fluorescent screen. By looking through its lenses in the dark, one can see the shedding of the cosmic seed of the slowly dying carbon in its radium stage as the rays of those cosmic seeds bombard the screen. The effect is beautiful, like looking into the heavens on a starry night, with all of its stars twinkling into appearance and disappearance, as fireflies twinkle in the meadow on a dark night. Carbon never comes within perception as tomium, but its efforts to reach tomium are evidenced in the uranium group of isotopes, each of which there are 15 before tomium is reached. Out of this group, several have been found and made use of, especially those from which the atom bomb has been produced, figure 70. Radioactivity has so nearly reached its maximum at this point that the speed of the cosmic seed shed by these isotopes has been measured at 180,000 miles per second, which is approximately the speed of light nearing its ending point at tomium, where the octave again begins as alphanon.
That's fascinating. That last sentence, its ending point at tomium, where the octave again begins at alphanon. So that's kind of the same as the law of one. You know, at the end of the octave, it starts over from the beginning again.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
I also I have a different version than was being read. There were some small differences along the way.
Are you reading from the book, BJ?
Yes.
And Jim, are you reading from the book also?
Yes.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Are they different printings?
I have a hardback.
Oh, okay. I have a paperback.
Yeah.
I have a paperback.
That's what I have as well.
You have paperback?
Yeah.
Well, a couple of times I looked up when Jim said something that was different in my book, and no one else seemed to register. So I was like, oh, I think everyone else is reading the same book, and I'm reading a different one. Yeah. Like, for instance, on 269, there were a few times in a row you said 13, and in my book it said 12. Like 12 efforts, 12 isotopes. Among these 12 is the vital tungsten. And you said 13. Interesting.
Oh, mine says 13.
Yeah.
Yeah, mine says 13, but BJ says 12. So that's interesting. Is your publication, what's the year of your publication?
Mine says copyright 71.
Ah, yeah, there is a newer version.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So do you have my original copy, PJ?
No, I bought my own.
Interesting. That's strange.
It is.
Well, and there's a footnote in mine on page 269, footnote 5, as evidenced by 13 isotopes, including unknowns. And I think since the original publishing of this book, which I believe was in 43 or 47, some of the isotopes and the positions that he had identified, but there was no known element at that position, were discovered by scientists.
Yeah.
So I think there's there was some throughout the course of his life, after he developed his chart of the octave of the elements, he made changes to it. He made updates and modifications to it as he continued to refine the model. So I guess it went from 12 to 13, and in yours it says 12, and somewhere after 70 it was changed to 13. Of course, not by him.
Well, it's interesting. I'm just looking in it, and it also says preface to the 1994 edition in my book.
Oh,
this
yeah.
is this 1994 edition. So it does look like it got updated, but the copyright didn't update. Oh, wait, I guess it does. It says 1971, 1994. Okay, I didn't look at that. So 1994, that's my copyright.
Okay. Well, that's a mystery. I don't know why yours is different.
Well, thank goodness for evolution. Yeah. Or else we'd be stuck at 12 when we're really at 13.
Yeah.
Well, the one thing, I mean, again, like I said, it's very technical. This section we just read is very technical. But the one thing that occurs to me to just point out and try to reinforce is along the wave axis, which is the the curved line of motion, the still curved line of motion that begins in the center of the cube and ends at the corner of the cube. Around that, the two spiraling lines of light are organized, and they're constantly interpenetrating one another. And at any point along that dance of the father and the mother light and the spirals, there will be a preponderance of one or the other, except at the still points. So at the very center of the cube and at the very corner of the cube, they both have gone to zero. They both have disappeared. But along where there is motion, there's going to be a preponderance of one or the other. And I think we've heard him say that before, this idea of the preponderance. And that notion of the preponderance of general activity over radioactivity comes up in this description. So on light's journey from the beginning of the octave of matter to carbon, there is an increase of general activity. So there's an increase of like winding up or the father light. So general activity is preponderant in the whole first 4.5 octaves of the cycle, and then radioactivity becomes preponderant. And at its extreme, we get to the last elements, which are what are the so-called radioactive elements, because they're incredibly radioactive. They're incredibly preponderantly degenerative. So I don't know if that makes sense. It's just words. It's hard to describe. It's a bit of a visual concept, but for the first half of the cycle of matter, general activity, or basically like winding up into solidity, is preponderant, is more more present or more strong. And in the second half, the unwinding of matter is preponderant to the point where we get to the nuclear, the radioactive elements, which are unwinding almost at the speed of light. May?
It reminds me of the birth and death of stars and the birth and death of life. And so with, and even the humans, as we are, as the sperm and the egg collide in this amazing fractal of light, they have it, science has that now photographed. And then as we grow up, we are continuing until we reach that still point, right? And then we go back, and I guess we're going radioactive as we age. And the good news is we still go back and we go out as stars again. So that makes me feel really happy, actually.
Mm-hmm.
So just bringing a little star humor into the mix.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
The preponderance idea reminds me of the yin yang.
Mm-hmm.
Like in each side, in the white part, there's a little bit of black. It's there's the preponderance of white, but it still has elements of the other side. And it also reminds me of earlier in the book when he was talking about the I guess there's a cube of space, and the cube of space contains, like the space side contains the same stuff as the contracted sphere of light.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just the opportunity for the preponderance of one or the other.
Right.
Like they condense away from each other.
Mm-hmm. That's it. Yep. Well, I'm pleased. I think it's just it seems like it's coming more and more into our awareness, some of the concepts he's teaching.
Yeah.
I hope it's helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Seems like it keeps clarifying. It's 8:30, so we've expired our time. Is there any other final? Yeah, go ahead, BJ.
I meant to announce at the beginning of the call, and I'm doing it now. There's a call tomorrow. Neil is giving a presentation on the inner planes, 7 to 8:30. And if you care to join, we're using the Law of One link. It'll be the same as that call, same link.
Yeah, and you could just text either one of us or email either one of us if you have any questions about that.
Yeah, or Telegram.
Well, thank you all for being here, being together, exploring.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.
Mwah. See you soon.
Love you all.
Love you all. Great being with you. Thank you, Aaron, for facilitating.
You're welcome. For being with you, Jim, and May, and
Love
BJ,
you
and Kent.
guys.
Yeah.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye-bye.